All right. I think we are officially begun on our first live stream, which I think currently this is our only content up since we're switching providers. I haven't re-uploaded the episodes on our new platform, so right now it's just YouTube and what we got going on here.
All right. Well, we haven't recorded in 7 or 8 months anyway,
Yeah,
so
true.
kind of makes sense. Have a fresh start. I mean, hopefully there will be people catching up with us watching this our first live stream. We do have some episodes of our podcast that we recorded 2020 and 2021 intermittently. We've got a lot going on, and we're still figuring out the technology and what we want this project to be. I think we can introduce it a little bit now, but hopefully, by the time most of you see this, those episodes will be up and available. You can look at some of them dated back over the last couple of years. But yeah, Everyday Sacred is our fun little brainchild about bringing the sacred into the everyday. It's all right there on the surface.
Absolutely. And I think going forward, we're kind of hoping to put out season 1 is kind of a big all at once thing. And then we're going to kind of alternate these live shows with recorded content that we put out, mostly podcasts, but we'll probably put up a video to go with them, just us wearing headphones and chatting. But going forward, I think we should hopefully hit a pretty regular schedule and try and keep this content going. We're not going to put out a show every month. What we're going to try to do is aim to put out content a big chunk of the year and then take a little break for a while, which allows us to kind of come up with topics and ideas going forward for the next season and try to do that kind of season structure.
Right. So there will be quiet times.
Absolutely.
And hopefully some busier times. I think we started talking about this before the pandemic came into full swing, in the end of 2019 into 2020, and, seeing the sort of spiritual vacuum in our society right now.
Yeah.
And then, COVID hit us, and thinking about what was sacred and what has meaning in our life became important, but also became a secondary concern a lot of the time. And, we were, like so many of us in the entire earth, we're just trying to get by.
Absolutely.
This podcast, the project has been kind of an anchor in that, and it's like nice to be able to reflect on what has meaning for us. We talked early on in COVID about just the nature of it and the surprise that so many of us were facing in our first recordings, and then as the Black Lives Matter protest movement kicked up over the spring and summer, we reflected a little bit on that, and then as we were starting to convince ourselves we were heading back toward normal at the end of 2020 after the election and all of that, we thought we were going to hit a steady stream of podcast releases, and we've got some great topics that are not, timely, that are not based on the news or based on anything that we really want to hit. Some of them we'll start on. But I think coming back to this project after a little bit of a hiatus, like, we have this idea of doing some live streams where we can not worry about trying to edit, not worry about trying to be super informed on topic. It can be sometimes a little bit of a brainstorm. I don't have a lot of notes prepared today. Sometimes it might be a little bit, more of a deep dive. We might have some research to share, or hopefully someone to chat with. But it's also just a way for us to have some regularity without, the pressures of our own personal lives, and trying to edit and put together podcast episodes on our own time where we don't have a lot. And it's something, I don't want to set expectations too high for the live stream, because it's just a conversation about, what's going on, what we're interested in, what we're reading, and hopefully what we want to go deeper into in, some of the further episodes.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, to kind of start this, I mean, we haven't even introduced ourselves, so a lot of people. Uh, my name is Michael, and Shane's in the corner there. It's displaying your full name. I may have to edit that out later. No, I mean, not that we got anything to hide, right?
That is my full name.
So I did prepare a few basic questions, and I thought I would just we could toss them around for a few minutes. I mean, we don't have to keep this too long, but, I thought the first most basic building block to kind of talk about is what we think sacred means. We've talked about this a little bit in some of our intro stuff in the show, but I think this is a good thing to kind of toss around in real time and just play around with. Because obviously it means different things to different people.
Even the two of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and it means something different to me, at different times in my life and different times of the day. I mean, let's be honest. But go ahead and kind of talk about that if you could. What you think of as sacred.
Well, your description right there, where you say even during times of the day, like in some ways, sacred is a synonym for important.
Mm-hmm.
So there are times where the most important thing is, what I'm going to eat next.
Sure.
Or my plans for the day, what I'm going to do after work. That's always. And that has a little bit more of a sacred feel to it. I think the differences between the two concepts, while they're not fully synonymous, is sacred has a deeper meaning. It's important, but there's a spiritual component. It's important, but it also gives importance. It lends meaning. So sacred to me has always meant like the manifestation of my values and my beliefs. And I was not raised particularly religious, so I've had to define sacred for myself, as long as I can remember. And I've studied religions, I've studied mythology, and I've been interested in that. So sacred it moves, throughout your life. What's really important to you, what really gives your life meaning when you're young, when you're growing up, is a lot different than as you mature and as you find more meaning in your life, or as you start a family, or as you start to build some sort of legacy, or later on in life, what you want to leave behind, what your impact is, what it is that gives you peace as at different phases. So I don't know. It's part of the reason I was drawn to the word for this project is because it's hard to pin down exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes what is sacred to me is what gets me the most fired up. When I look at the world and I see like great injustices or strange things in the culture that don't make sense to me, and I'm like, what do we actually value as a culture? I think our lives are sacred, and I think one of the things I see in our culture is that we don't treat even human life as sacred. Even every other, there are people out, suffering not just all over the world, but down the street from me, and I see them, and I'm like, why is it that we as a society don't treat your lives as sacred, and why is it that some lives have more value than others? And that, that's the thing that can anger me at certain times. And it's because I feel like it should be more sacred than it is. I'm curious what some of your thoughts were as well.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, obviously, you've touched on a lot of really important points, and also touched on the fact that there's this amorphous kind of quality to the word. it's like a lot of philosophical concepts like morality and stuff. People argue, is morality what we all decide is right and wrong as a society, or is morality something that's decided by gods or by something bigger than gods? If you're following like that, some Socratic dialogues and stuff. There's a little bit of truth in each of those things immediately. I think that everybody kind of can pick up on without a lot of deep thought even. And I always like to define the sacred as that which is kind of set aside from the mundane, to separate from the mundane. But I like that definition in the sense that it just kind of leaves more questions than answers. You're like, well, then what's mundane? Is that's set aside something we decide, or is it just the nature of the thing that's sacred that sets itself aside without our interactions or interjections in that process? And I think it's a lot of little things that go into that, because ironically, time and time again, I've seen so many things that would be considered mundane, like what's for dinner, to become a thing that's sacred, and I've always really appreciated that aspect where we use this term in a group and we use this term in a population and in a culture, and we feel like it means the same thing, that other people know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But when it comes down to it, I think that's partially true and partially nonsense. And that's okay. I mean, it still has value because of that. That doesn't keep it from being meaningful. Because what's sacred is kind of the essence of what's meaningful. And I think the fact that the same things that are meaningful to you... Sure, yeah.
It's meaningful, it's important, but it is the spiritual essence. Like sacred it's a religious word.
Yeah.
Traditionally, it's a Latin word.
And it's got that spiritual component to it that you can't really strip out. I mean, you can try and make it less religious, and that's great, yeah. But
I think there is an atheist and an agnostic sacred as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes from that spiritual center that even atheist people have a center, a center belief. That's not that they believe in nothing. It's that they
absolutely, and I think it's part of the human experience that these things happen in your life, whether you're atheist or agnostic or Southern Baptist, whatever you define yourself as. I think there's a handful of things that happen in your life, like your child's born and you see that, or you fall in love with somebody, or you watch your parents die and you hold their hand through that, and I think there's this thing that pulls you out of the mundane, no matter who you are. I don't think it's possible to experience those things and not feel that sacred backing to the moment. And whether you have a framework to define that, is kind of up to your own experiences and what you believe in. But I like to think that most people are experiencing something very similar in those moments. Something that they can relate to each other through. And, I mean, as you said, these days it seems like it's hard to find anything everyone relates to anymore. We really like to define ourselves by our differences rather than our similarities. And I don't want to lecture anybody about that. I guess that's as good a way as any. There's sometimes I question it, but I definitely think that if we spent more time on the sacred, we might spend a lot less time on things like war and hatred and, revenge and all those things that we generally consider to not be one of our finer qualities as a species. And so that's one of the reasons why I've really wanted to focus on it in my life. To whatever degree that has happened.
And I do think you're right that there's at all levels of society or even like global human culture, it does seem, at least on the surface, that we are really focused on our differences and our separate identities and our layers of in some sense, our layers of uniqueness. What sets us apart, what makes us special, but also what contrasts that. And I don't know how true that is. It's hard because we're so inundated with media messages that really focus on how everyone's differences. And
Absolutely.
I try to not be too wrapped up in that, but I can't help it, There are people in society that I think of as basically like an enemy, and I don't want to feel that way about anyone, really. I think fundamentally we have a lot more in common with anyone in the world than differences. And it really is these small marginal things, but they're also, those small things can be like the fundamental beliefs that give our lives meaning, which is why we fight over them.
Yeah.
So it might be a small difference if you were looking at it completely objectively, like looking down at humans from outer space or from a divine lens. You're like, why are they fighting so much? They're all the same, but it's not that way to us.
No, I mean we all have what's important to us, and a lot of that we share. Some of it we don't. And again, as we age and as we mature and just move through our lives, those things can change. They can morph into other things. You get people who in their younger years were incredibly rebellious, grow up to be, incredibly conservative and protective of tradition. And you wonder how that can happen to one being, in one lifetime. Like people that wouldn't recognize themselves as the younger versions of themselves, and yet feel like they're the same person they always were. I think
they learn more and they change their practice, but they're like, I'm still that punk rocker. I'm a business owner now, or whatever.
Absolutely, and
that was my time. And maybe they get blind to being able to see other people who are at that age now going through a similar process.
Yeah.
But they don't see. I mean, many of them may have deep regrets that feel that they don't want to reflect on that at all, but deep down they know that was that at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so hard to make it through life without regrets, and I've tried so hard, but I am just human like anybody else. I've definitely got things that I wish I would have done differently, and sadly some things that maybe I couldn't have done differently. I did the best I could, but I still wish it had gone better. And I think that's pretty common to the human experience. It's one of those things, if you don't feel that way about life, then maybe you might be a little out of touch with some things. Not to judge again. I think talking about what's sacred is really what kind of started a lot of this. And definitely we've tried to keep it not too religious, although we have a couple episodes that really dive into concepts in religion. So we recorded that show. I don't even think we got it up, but it was on the devil. We'll have it up soon. Either way.
Well, that was a fun one.
Exactly. Yeah, I enjoyed that too. And one of the things that struck me in that, and I wanted to kind of talk to you about it, was how concepts of like pure, how would you phrase it? Like these ideas of evil as an absolute, and the idea of evil in people and in society and in a supernatural sense has kind of changed in your life, since we kind of talked about how these concepts change and morph as you go through. And the way I see the devil and the way I see evil in our world is so different than what I was raised with, or in media, or portrayed in TV shows, and comic books, which I'm a big fan of, I'll admit. And so, yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about how that's changed for you and kind of what you think about evil in our culture and evil in ourselves, in our species.
So just, reflect on maybe how my concept of evil has changed.
Yeah, like, what do you think evil is? What is the devil, if you had to put your finger on it? In a real life sense, not in this, like, really esoteric, or maybe, it's purely esoteric for you, For some people I know, that's absolutely the ticket,
Right, and I think what's been interesting in that episode, we did some research on that, and I learned quite a bit figuring that out, because it wasn't that long ago that I thought of evil as a universal concept.
Yeah.
Or good and evil. And realizing that its roots, can be traced to specific cultures and religions, and spread that way. They didn't exist with, at a certain point in human history, the concept was created. Which is wild for me to wrap my head around. Because it's not just that it seems self-evident, it's that in many ways it kind of is. And I think there is, my concept of evil doesn't have a divine source. My spirituality is changed from that. It could change back. At one point I had more of that association. I think with this project, we're not trying to espouse any particular religion, but we can't help but explore religious and spiritual beliefs in a podcast or in a project where we discuss the sacred. And since my religion has always been an exploration as sort of a seeker. I guess I've played with the idea of evil, but for me now, where I'm at, evil seems like a metaphor for human greed.
Mm-hmm.
Where, human beings at all levels, it's most easy to see the contrast in like wealth disparities and countries at war, so cultures at war with each other, or taking advantage of others, or systemic racism.
Sure.
It's a great example because it's rooted in fear and misunderstanding, but its expression to me seems more like greed, where if we are in the have group, which in many ways, like I represent that, just by my sort of ethnic background as an American, and learning that there are ways that you can other someone, that you can take advantage of them, that you can label them as less than, or label them as evil, even if they are really the weaker party, and then be able to extract wealth, from them. I mean, I'm jumping around a little bit there, but human greed as an expression of those with power justifying their I don't know, I'm reaching for the word right now, but exploitation
Sure.
of those without power through a spiritual lens, by labeling people savages, or labeling people junkies is what I see today. I see the poor in this world being blamed for poverty, and that really bothers me, because we'll never find a solution if we're blaming people for the problems that they have, that they have in society.
Yeah.
They made poor choices, but I've made poor choices. I've made plenty of poor choices that I was able to bounce back from because of the state of my life and the support that I have. And other people may not have that, and I don't want to judge them for that. But evil to me is like not viewing that as something that can be helped.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important aspects of that is judging people by their actions and not just by their history and where they come from. I had an acquaintance, a friend, and he said something which seemed shocking. I think he just liked to shock people. But he said, nobody's ever given me a good reason why slavery is morally wrong.
There you go.
And in that sense, he was just looking at ancient history, like, Romans and Greeks. And I mean, to be fair, slavery, we talk about like it was something that started in the 1700s or something, but it's actually
longer than writing.
Exactly. I mean, we have no real basis. We don't know when slavery started. It was so old. And anyways, my answer right away, the one thing that popped into my mind, and honestly, he told me later, it kind of convinced him right away, is that slavery requires you, at its root, by definition, to see somebody as less than you. Mm-hmm. And often an entire group of people as less than you. Mm-hmm. Like they're less than you could ever be at your lowest, at their highest. And I think that's... You were talking a little bit about evil there, and it kind of resonated in that sense of like, on this deep systemic level of creating so much hardship and so much suffering because of this simple, basic change in the way you view something else. And in this case, specifically other human beings. And I think we still do that, and we don't think about it because we think about it differently. So for instance, we talk about how slavery is absolutely gone today. But, even if you're looking at the United States, which is what you and I probably know the most about since we live here in the United States, you have so many questionable areas, like labor through prisoners, people convicted of crimes who are forced to do lots of physical labor, sometimes with little to no repayment whatsoever. And
increasingly they're being contracted out, and they're doing manufacturing work.
Yeah.
And they're doing more and more skilled labor, and it's a way for like American companies, not just a social service, to pay your debt to society, which is how it's still framed, but like American companies are able to contract out prison labor in order to cut costs on production.
Yeah.
It's hard to view that as anything but slavery.
It's hard to see it as reform for people,
Yeah, they're not going to learn a lesson; they're just working. I can envision like the classic sort of chain gang concept where prisoners are building and repairing roads and railroads, and they're helping to build society. I feel like there could be a justification for that, assuming that that all those people were rightly convicted,
Sure.
and that all of them were learning from their mistakes and were reforming and were at a certain point going to have paid their dues and be released back as productive members of society. And even in the best cases, it's really hard to argue that that's true for all prisoners. You know? And that's what I find troubling now is we have people that are in prison for minor drug offenses that are being forced into work on these prison plantations, so to speak.
No,
and you could say they're rightly convicted because they broke the law. There was evidence mounted against them and they lost a court case, but I think that just points to the difference between law and justice.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think there's a profit motive too. Like when it comes to people picking up garbage on the side of the road, it's hard for me to envision a society in which public officials are like, there's so much garbage, you need to go out and convict people at all cost to pick it up. Like, but when you're talking about selling skilled labor to corporations and things like that, that really gets into an area where you're asking for systemic abuse, really, to like come in and drive that a certain direction. You know, we're no longer, breaking rocks on the chain gang. We're like, we're like manufacturing things and that are being sold by other places, and our labor is being contracted out. And that's something you can easily see people wanting to take advantage of.
Yeah, I don't know when that door was open, or if it was open as soon as they passed the 13th Amendment.
Yeah, no, but it's something to keep an eye on, and I think it's one of those areas where I didn't think of that ever as evil, or being under the influence of evil when I was a younger man. I mean, I didn't think much of it at all, but certainly as you get older, there's these things that stand out in society that really make you question it on this like deep philosophical level. And you're like, is that system, has it been created to abuse something, to like cause harm? And sometimes I think things cross those lines. I think of evil as something that harms itself against reason, like that's a really loose definition, and I do that kind of on purpose because I think, I think as a younger person I believed in concepts. I was taught to believe in like the devil as being an actual philosophical problem, as well as maybe an incarnate being bent on the destruction of everything that was good, And as an adult, I think that a lot of those concepts are really silly, like they're clearly human constructs that we use, and I don't think they make sense. And I think we talked about this in one of our episodes, like there's no concept of absolute bigness, or absolute hotness or coldness, really. I mean, there is an absolute zero, but that's not exactly the same thing, It doesn't have a moral equivalent to it, and
absolute bigness is
just
the entire universe. and even that opens the gate for what's beyond the universe.
Absolutely. Well, and a lot of these things become comparisons, like deep down they are comparisons. Like something can only be big if there's something of a different size,
Mm-hmm.
And something can only be good or evil if there's something to compare it to. If everybody did the same things, it wouldn't be evil, I guess. Um, and I do think that there's more to it than that on the surface. You know, like, again, I think you look at Euthyphro's dilemma is a good one, you know, where you're really starting to question, like, where evil comes from. And you're like, it can't come from God. Whatever God is, basically. Or else God would decide what is good and evil, and that doesn't make any sense. You know, if you had God wake up tomorrow and tell everybody it's okay to kill little kids if you don't like how they smell or something, you know, there'd be something that rings not true about that, you know, maybe immoral, we could say. And we could all figure that out. We wouldn't be like, well, if God says it, then I guess it's how it is now. And not just because it was different either, you know. There's just something about that you're like, no, doesn't seem, can't put my finger on it, but doesn't seem fair, you know. And little kids are born with a concept of fairness. I think it's kind of innate to the human experience as well. I just love the philosophical idea of where these things come from. You know, where are they rooted in the human psyche? Is it part of a cultural consciousness? You know, maybe the Jungian cultural subconscious, or is it something that society has determined, or that we pick up through our media and things like that? And so little of it can actually be pinned down to any one thing. And some of these, like I said, I mean, I've never even heard a really convincing argument for. So I think we're left kind of really using the human experience, like our own intuition and our feelings, to delve into what is evil, what is not evil, you know, what is sacred, what is not sacred, what's good and bad. And it becomes this gray area that you almost need to be a conscious feeling being to have any real concept of. You know, hard to put down in rules and laws and write down concretely. So, you know, I think there's something very special about that. That, you know, you really got to be a conscious thinking being. And even then, you know, we disagree. Let's see, well, we're about 40 minutes in. So far, so good. Like I said, I get lost in conversation pretty easily. In the future, I hope there'll be chat and stuff.
Yeah.
Was there anything else we went over? Yeah. Was there anything else that we went over in this last set of shows that really stood out to you that you liked talking about, or look forward to talking about more in depth again?
I mean, we touched on so many things in our recordings. I mean, one of the topics that we sort of, the episodes sort of fell apart that we want to return to is the concept of food and the sacredness of that. And I think food is one of the closest things to like a universal sacred concept. Every culture has a sacrament of some kind, a sacred tradition involving food, or the ingestion of something. And our problem when we recorded that, and why we'll have to do it again, is that it's just so much. And I think it's something I hope that we can circle around on all the time, and at least like talk about seasonalities of food. In my work at the farmer's market, I see that a lot, and I see how much meaning it gives to people. The food itself is obviously the key component, but you know what excites me about my job is that it gives meaning to these farmers and these food producers who in many ways, you know, it's their livelihood on the one hand, but also like it gives their life a lot of meaning. You know, they care deeply about the things that they grow and the animals that they care for and the foods they make in the kitchen. And there's a cultural heritage feeding into it. And for the shoppers, both the regular shoppers and those that are on assistance, it gives their lives, more depth to be able to get their food from someone who grew it than to just pick it up at a store. And like that's me proselytizing for farmers markets on one hand, but I see that every day, and then like the relationships that people cultivate there, and there's a little subculture within the market that really excites me, and it's in me personally is a sacred part of my life, and I'm happy that it's my job, but it's also like it's exciting to see all of the different things that intersect through that market and through that medium of food in a completely secular, environment. There's no objective, there's no over the top religious spiritual element to it, but it is giving a lot of people's lives meaning, and it's giving them connection to one another. And it became so evident during COVID lockdown times when so many of our other venues for connection were shut off. But people were still able to come out, and even earlier on when we were limiting the amount of people and trying to maintain space and distance, and we had masks on almost the whole time, but there was still this interaction and the sacredness of that in-person community that just can't be replicated in a Zoom call.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So part of the reason that food as a topic excites me is everything else does through it.
It's as much as it's a secular thing. I have often thought about the fact that when it comes to like cultural mythology, I think we in our modern American world have this myth about progress, that we're moving ever forward in society. Yeah, like your cell phone, your next cell phone's going to be better than this cell phone. That the PlayStation 5 is going to be a step up from the PlayStation 4. Like we know that so much that we picture the world in 100 years as being, maybe our bodies are made of light and I get my flying car finally and stuff, But deep down we know that that's no guarantee. Like this is, as we've seen the last couple of years, especially, society can really fall apart, pretty substantially in a human lifetime. But I sometimes think our relationship to food is one of the victims of that thing where, the idea of farming and these heritage foodways that belong to every culture are just getting swept under the rug, and in that battle for the future and in that battle for progress. And I mean, it's just like so many other things that were given to us that turned out to not in any way be good. Like Better Living Through Chemistry failed the 1950s. I mean, we all realize today that you can't just subscribe enough pharmaceuticals, like methamphetamines, to get unhappy housewives, productive at home. Like that just doesn't work. It's wrong to do to people. It's wrong to do to your culture. And I like to see... Yeah, I know. I love to see the resurgence of our own like heritage foodways and stuff in our country, and just community by community all over, because it's not like one thing that's happening just everywhere. It's happening in its own way in so many different little places. Like, we really homogenize the way we see the United States. We think of it as one whole, and in some ways it is. Yeah, we're huge. I mean, like, it's bigger than Europe, and so You're just, maybe not really, but maybe, and at least comparably.
I'm asked, yeah.
Yeah, so, to think that people in Wisconsin are like here in Seattle, or even Bellingham to Seattle, there's some differences,
Right.
Yeah, like, and it's
I like celebrating those differences, like, and when I go to visit Bellingham, I enjoy the things that are different than Seattle. When I go back to Whidbey Island, I enjoy the differences that Whidbey Island has. And it's not just that it's more rural. There are cultural differences up there that you can just sense, feel.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
And like traveling within the United States, I went to New Orleans for the first time last year. Couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. But there is also like an Americanness that unites us that is really exciting. That some of them I'm not excited about, like the fact that I could go to Walgreens in New Orleans,
sure,
Seattle, also Bellingham, Rite Aid on Whidbey Island, and whatever, things like that. I'm not excited by any of that, but culturally there are things that unite us, and there are these like mimetic ideas and these phrases and these concepts that we have and these jokes that we can make with any American.
Yeah.
Even a Canadian might not get.
The money in your pocket still works the same.
Right.
And
that's nice.
It is. I got to admit. I mean, I try, I'm ever the anthropological student, and I try not to fight against cultural differences and embrace them, but it is fun that you could drive for days in your car and people speak the same language, maybe a little differently, and that they still can argue about the president, and you can pay for your gas with the same money that you did 3 days ago in the same place, and I think that's really cool.
2 or 3 states away.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of brings me back mentally to how we started this conversation. So maybe it's a good way to wrap it up. Is that we find ourselves in many ways by our differences, and I, there's good and bad about that, but it's also we can also celebrate our differences. Going to New Orleans, getting to celebrate their mix of like Spanish, French, American culinary heritage, cultural tradition, but also our similarities, the fact that we're all Americans and we can all, like, I met strangers at a bar and we're able to, bitch about what's the state of the country and this, a lot of the same things. And, some of it's rough, seeing the same issues of poverty and inequality were there. In many ways far worse than we see it, even in Seattle where it's quite visible. So you can see the similarities and differences, and within America as a microcosm, as a very large culture, I still see our similarities outweighing our differences, but those positive cultural differences we have, and the regional and local heritage of the food and the traditions and the turn of phrase and everything, are really exciting. Being able to celebrate our differences rather than using them as a wedge to divide us and make us fight each other. Like, the differences give us, what it is that it gives us so much meaning. It makes our lives and the places that we come from or to choose to live sacred.
Yeah. Gives us a reason to get on the plane and go to New Orleans, because it is different. But it is also reassuring to know that, if we do find some solutions to some of our problems, those too might have an element of universality to them. And they might fix problems all over the place, all over the world, potentially.
Yeah.
And
many of the problems that we're facing here are also being faced in Louisiana and in New York and in Minnesota, but also in London and Paris and Cairo and the country, everywhere.
And so, we're really we're kind of focused on on talking about the sacred and exploring the concepts in there to look for things to kind of enrich and help our own lives. But I do hope that that transitions to people all over the world in all sorts of situations. And I hope people with better imaginations than my own, learn to apply anything I figure out and share with other people to lots of places that, I never would have. And I think that is hopefully the kind of community we'll be able to build through all this and through our work. So, I think we've hit the 50-minute mark, which I was aiming for 45. I think we did pretty good. So
it was really nice chat, sort of spitball some ideas and just, at the end of the day, we're keeping track of our conversation, some of the things we're interested in. Still, it's interesting to at least two people.
Absolutely. We do this for ourselves. If anybody else wants to get involved, please do, but it's what we do on an average, normal basis, so,
Right.
pretty easy to put time into.
This project is for us to explore concepts of spirituality, concepts of life, and politics as well, whatever we find interesting. We want to share and we want to explore. We're not at any point trying to be any more as an expert than we are.
We're just two guys, for sure, trying to figure out the world and our place in it. And I think in some of those explorations and some of those journeys, hopefully people will be able to pull some wisdom out of that for themselves. And we'd love to hear what wisdom you all have that we can explore ourselves. So, it's definitely the journey. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we'll call it good here, and I'll shut the stream down. But look forward to this a couple times a month. It should hit about 2 weeks from now. We'll do this again, and blessed be everybody.
Blessed be.